I'm Joe Levy, and this is episode 6 of Auriculum, an occasional podcast that is part of Robert Christgau's And It Don't Stop on Substack. And when I say occasional, I mean it. The last time we did one of these was March of 2021.
Really?
Yes. But if all goes well, Bob, we will be back more on the regular than that. And with me today is...
If that's what well is, we will.
Okay. With me today, I was already speaking up, is Bob Christgau. Say hello to the people, Bob.
Hiya. That's the Jack Newfield. Hi. Hiya. You don't know who Jack Newfield is?
Now you have to tell people who Jack I know who Jack Newfield is, Bob, but you have to tell, like, everyone else who's listening
the late Village Voice political reporter.
Well, that was a short definition and efficient. Also with us is our MVP guest, once again, the incredible rhyme animal, Rob Sheffield.
Hiya. That was a Bob Sheffield doing Jack Newfield. That was a Bob Christgau doing Jack Newfield sort of Village Voice. Hiya. Just carrying the apostolic thread.
All right. We are here for the first ever quarterly Pazz and Jop report. That is my invention. It is also my excuse to talk with the two of you about some records that have come out in the last 4 months or so. Grades and stars have been given out by both of you to some of these records, but we are not here to award points. We're not ranking things. We're just talking about albums that may or may not end up on year-end lists. And let's start there with the idea of the year-end list. Do you guys keep track of your top albums throughout the year? And if so, how?
I usually start in May or so. I haven't put together the file called Dean's, but I will shortly because it's useful. It's much easier to do your work when you can just go there and remind yourself of what you used to like or did like. So
in that file, like, you just drop the title of anything that seems like a Dean's List record?
No, anything that's gotten an A, I put it in the way it'll appear at the Dean's List at the end of the year. Artist, title, label.
And Rob, do you keep track of things as the year goes by?
Yes, but mostly in terms of like what I'm listening to now. So it's more at the end of the year, I'll look back on what I listened to and hopefully how it changed for me over time, how it grew or shrank, as the case may be.
All right. Well, let's start off with an album that I know you both love, which is Gina Birch's I Play My Bass Loud. Rob, you actually interviewed Gina Birch for Rolling Stone, and we will...
A long feature. That was long.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Yeah.
We will have a link to that in our show notes. That's very podcast official to say that. Link to that in our show notes. Bob, this was an A record for you.
That's correct. And I wasn't convinced at first. It seemed a little scratchy, but then I didn't like the Raincoats that much at first either. And it's not altogether dissimilar since she is one of the original Raincoats. And there's a sense in which it has the same kind of attitude towards musical propriety, I would say. And even though that Gina Birch is now, she's 67, is that right?
Yes.
And she's not really a musician anymore. She just did this, as she says, because in Rob's piece, as I recall, the songs, she started just writing the songs and she couldn't get away from them. And so she wrote some more songs and made an album. And her husband, which I don't think you did say, is connected to the people who did the production. He knows a lot about the music business, even though she herself now identifies as a painter. And it's scratchy. Her voice was never great, but gradually, as with several other records that we're going to be talking about, I not only began to say, oh, no, that's pretty good. I began to say, that's pretty great. And that's what I think about it. It sounds to me like quite a possible top 10 record. Oh, well, you got to see how it lasts. You got to see whether it sticks with you. You can't know that until the time passes.
Rob, what about this record hit you?
Very first thing was the humor. The Raincoats, in addition to everything else, were a wildly funny band, a very uproarious and irreverent band whose humor connected before everything else. The first song of theirs I heard was In Love on the great compilation Wanna Buy a Bridge. Talk about a world-changing, life-altering compilation. It had all those rough trade bands who are otherwise virtually impossible to hear in the U.S., all on one beautiful blue record that Bob rightly gave an A at the time, but it had lots of bands where it turned out to be their best song. For a lot of people like the Raincoats, it was just one of the greats. But I remember listening to In Love and thinking, I don't understand a word of this song. I'm pretty sure the word in love is the chorus, and it might be the entirety of the lyric. I really can't tell. You could just hear these voices, and you can hear the effect of these women laughing to each other vocally and also with their instruments, their comically wobbly sound. The violin is very funny.
Well, it's worth remembering that as of Wanna Buy a Bridge, the idea of an all-female rock band was extremely unconventional. There was the Slits, and although X-Ray Spex was not an all-female band, that Poly Styrene was a very important figure in that world. And in the case of both the Slits and the Raincoats, as many blues boys might well point out, they couldn't play their instruments. Not really very well at all. They learned, and sometimes not playing it was fine, because they were interesting people who expressed themselves in interesting ways and had a sense of humor. Initially, the Raincoats were too crude to me, and when I wrote my review of the Gina Birch record, I remembered that. And initially, this record was a little too crude for me as well, only then suddenly I began to notice that every song was a good song. Every fucking song was a good song.
Didn't you go back to that first Raincoats record?
Oh, I did, yes.
And did you think you might have underrated it at a B+? I don't want to upset the listeners who organize their lives in shelves around your grades, but did you think that you might have...
Yes, I definitely think it's better than a B+.
Better than a B+. A minus?
It happened.
Let's upgrade it right now.
I know I'm not going to do that.
Okay, all right.
That requires many more listens than I intend to give it. So it's probably an A-, since I don't want to listen to it 5 times to make sure it's an A.
Well, at the time you wrote about it, it was virtually impossible to find for anybody who was reading your work because it wasn't released in the U.S.
But Rob, as you pointed out in that piece you wrote for Rolling Stone, this album became this kind of talisman. It was a favorite of Bikini Kill's. It was a favorite of Kurt Cobain's. It was this totem that was impossible to find until when?
Well, it was first released in the U.S. in the early 90s when Kurt Cobain became a fan. He famously went to the Rough Trade store the first time he played London, looking specifically for this album, and Anna DeSilva was behind the counter. And it turned out they didn't have a copy. She had to ask around for one of her friends and get her copy so she could give it to Kurt. Kurt strong-armed his record company in the astounding 90s days when things like this could happen and got them to release the Raincoats albums. So the first Raincoats album came out for the first time in 1993, as did their second album and their oft-forgotten third album. Odie shaped the great second one, moving the third one. But it was wild that those records for the first time were now available to anybody who was looking for them. For a lot of U.S. kids in the 80s who found out about these records by reading writers like you, Bob, the one that we found, the one that was actually findable in a big city record store was the Kitchen tapes, because it was a Roar tape that
Oh yeah. I don't think I have it. I don't have any of those tapes anymore. In fact, I don't own a tape player that's going anymore.
Yeah, well, it's a great tape, and it's funny because Roar kept it in business, and Gina Birch said it was kind of comical to her that this was something that was so formative for American fans because the Raincoats themselves put no thought into it. As she said, that only came out because we needed money because we came to New York and spent our money. We had no money to get home with our plane tickets. So we just did this one-off show at the Kitchen and got paid and signed it off to this cassette company. And as a result, they got to fly home. But it's very comical to her. I think it's great. It holds up. It has them jamming a bit, which they were fantastic at. And No One's Little Girl, a Gina Birch song, kind of her key song, and in many ways the key Raincoat song, a very angry song, very funny song, but a real groove that definitely fits in with the vibe of this new album, which is the new album has a lot of anger, a lot of humor, and a lot of groove.
Sometimes I wake up and I wonder, what is my job? I play my bass loud.
Well, if it was a rarity for there to be bands made up entirely of women in the late 70s, it is no longer a rarity, which brings us to the second album we're going to discuss, Boygenius. Rob, you gave this a 5-star review in Rolling Stone, so I'm turning the mic over to you.
I love this record. This is a fantastic collaboration between 3 singer-songwriters who all have their individual followings. Before they made the first record together as Boygenius in 2018, they all had their individual followings. It was funny for me because I was mostly a Lucy Dacus fan, and I regarded her as the prize. And I remember when I first heard about Boygenius and went to see that band, I thought, oh, isn't it funny Lucy Dacus cut in a couple of her friends? I did not realize that Julian Baker and Phoebe Bridgers were significantly more popular and more famous than Lucy Dacus was at the time. I thought of this as Lucy Dacus's new side project because I was a huge fan of her, especially her album Historian.
Wait, what was that gig like? Tell us a little about seeing them.
You could definitely tell who in the crowd was there for each of them. That's when I realized, wow, Phoebe Bridgers is really a lot more popular than Lucy Dacus, but also just they're different kinds of charisma. Lucy Dacus is very much was even more so then, but still has that very shy, bookish woman going on stage with the guitar. And there's that sort of connection with the audience, even in a very big room, whereas Phoebe Bridgers shows up to rock you and destroy you. She's got a very aggressive and very sarcastic and very
have
witty
never
sort of
seen either of these
style.
people live, nor actually expecting ever to see them live in the future, although somebody dragged me, I'd go. I'm very surprised to hear that Phoebe Bridgers was as much a rocking mama as, or sister.
She is extremely funny. She is improv troupe hilarious. And yes, she does rock quite a bit.
I don't get that from the albums at all.
It's funny, even when I put on the rock songs from this record, Bob, you will sit there and say, where are the fast songs? Where are the rock songs? There are rock songs on this fucking record.
I like the record very much, but not because there are rock songs on this fucking record. And as a matter of fact, my favorite Phoebe Bridgers record is her Christmas record, because I think as one reason is that she didn't write all the songs. And I think that helped as far as I was concerned.
Even by your hot take standards, that one is absolutely melting my face off. That is an extreme hot take.
It's the solid truth. What can I tell you?
Flammable
I play. Look,
Bob, I think it would be important to acknowledge that is your solid truth, but keep going.
Right, yeah, right. No, I'm telling the truth. I like that record. Oh, there's one song on that record about, sorry, I did not replay it, but about sitting at the Christmas table and wanting to jump out of it, or I just don't remember the image, but it's an image of utter misery at Christmas that I found very touching.
The song you're talking about is the one by the guy who leads a band called McCarthy Trenching.
You don't have to be alone to be lonesome. It's easy to forget. Sadness comes crashing like a brick through the window. And it's Christmas, so no one can fix it.
Like a brick through the window. That was the line.
So I want to backtrack for a second and go back to that first Boygenius gig you were telling us about, Rob. They didn't have that many songs. What was the show?
It was largely their individual songs.
Okay. All
something
right.
that struck me about the three of them playing together, and this is something that they've only expanded more individually, but also collectively, especially with this album, especially with the presentation of this album. As a group, they are a rock group who want to make it fun for people to like them. They really want to win people over. That's something I love about this record. It really sounded like a band that really wanted to make it fun to be a fan of Boygenius.
First of all, remind me of the third woman in the group.
Julian Baker.
Yes, the real depressive. Yes.
One might also say she's the real rocker in the group. She's got the real, aggressive guitar rockers more than the other two on this album.
Is that true? I confess, I did not actually replay my Julian Baker solo albums as I did with Bridgers and Dacus. The last Dacus album was the first Dacus album I liked, but I liked it a lot. I thought it was really good.
So great.
And what I found about this music is not that it rocked really at all, but that when I paid attention to the lyrics, I was blown away, line by line by line. I think the writing on the record, I don't mean the songwriting, I mean the lyric writing, is extraordinary, and that's not something I ever found in them before. Not really, and I tried. The most recent Dacus solo album, the title of which I've currently forgotten,
Home Video.
I thought was really good, but I listened faithfully to the other two, and I'm sorry, I didn't think they were that good, and I tried, because they had such good word of mouth, perhaps even from you. And here, on this record, the second Boygenius record, not the first one, the second Boygenius record, the lyrics are really brilliant. But even then, it seems to me there's a certain kind of desultory quality to the music itself that the lyrics have to overcome. That's the way it...
There's a desultory quality to the lyrics. They are really good, and I'm glad you like them, and I'm glad they turned you around, but they're mostly about, it's not working. Once I took your medication to know what it's like, and now I have to act like I can't read your mind. That's a great lyric, but it's not about how awesome it is for those two people to be together.
Once I took your medication to know what it's like, Now I have to act like I can't read your mind. I ask you how you're doing and I let you lie. But we don't have to talk about it. I can walk you home and practice method acting. I'll pretend being with you doesn't feel like drowning. Telling you it's nice to see.
There's all sorts of good lines on this record, but they're not happy.
No, they're
thoughts.
not. No, they're not. And that's one reason I like the lyrics. I think that as articulations of that kind of feeling, they're witty. There's definitely a sharpness to them. So that, I mean, even though it's kind of bleak, it's also funny.
Rob, talk to me a little bit about the way that this album is playful with rock history. There's a song named after a Madonna record. There's a song named for a Sheryl Crow record where in the lyric they're listening to The Cure. There's a song named Leonard Cohen.
Oh, yeah, that one. That one definitely did get my attention.
That's a great one.
There's a Beatles reference. Am I missing anything?
There's a lot. Something that they do on this record with the rock history is very much wanting to be part of it, very much engaging with it and seeing themselves in it. I love the way that they look around through music history in a really scavenger sort of way, looking for pieces of it that they can see and hear themselves in. And that's something I love.
Rob, name a rocker from this record.
So many bangers. Do you want to hear the most rockin' song?
Sure.
$20 is very rockin'.
It's an all-night drive from your house to Reno to the T-Bird graveyard where we play with fire. In another life we were arsonists.
May I suggest that we move on? We could do an entire hour about this record.
No. We are indeed moving on, Bob. Thank you for jumping in on my job, but let's talk about Iris DeMent's Working on a World.
Which I was very pleased to hear, Rob, because I was afraid it wouldn't be like this, that you liked this record. When did you first hear it?
I first heard it when you suggested it, honestly, a few days ago. I didn't even listen to it after you wrote about it. It's funny that I've always been an Iris DeMent fan, but...
Oh, really? You've always been an Iris DeMent fan? That's interesting to me, because she doesn't seem like your kind of gal to me.
Musically, from the beginning, when she did that first album, really weird how aggressively folky it was. The one with really great liner notes by John Prine. She was more folky than I'm
very
used to
much
listening
so.
to, but her songwriting just always really great, always really bracing. This record, I didn't even know that it was around until you were talking about it, and it's really fantastic.
Well, I was introduced to Iris DeMent by my sister Georgia, who heard the very first album. And one reason I think both Georgia and I are interested in it is Iris DeMent's history. Iris DeMent grew up a born-again Christian from Arkansas, although she moved to Orange County, where her father was a janitor or something, when she was 3. And she seems to come from an extremely intelligent and tolerant family. I don't remember which of the Southern sects she came up in, but having grown up in a Northern church with a similar theology, I'm interested when somebody moves on from that. And on this record, I heard the second song on this record, which is Working on the World, where there is this line where she talks about, she thanks the sisters of the squad. And
The brave women of the squad.
Brave women of the squad. And the first time I heard that, I said, oh, Iris, you can't do that. I love you, and I do, but you just can't do that. What eventually I came to really appreciate how baldly political a good half of this record was. Now, I mean, you'd think I'm absolutely fervent leftist rock critic. I like political songs, but they have to work. And initially I said, no, you can't do this. This is a little too bold. But she does. And it becomes more and more. Now I think of this as one of her 2 or 3 best records, and I think it's one-dimensional, straightforward morality, which Working on a World that we'll never see. That's the end of that phrase. In other words, yes, it's bad out there, and it's not going to get as good as we would like it to be while we're alive, and we got to do what we can anyway.
Now down working on a world I may never see. I'm joining forces with the warriors of love who came before, and will follow you and me. I get up in the morning knowing I'm privileged just to be working on a world I may never
something that anybody makes popular music about. And ultimately, her, I'll call it chutzpah, in doing exactly that is one of the things I came to love about this record. There is a kind of a simplicity, simple sincerity. There's another song where she says, I know some Muslims and they're pretty nice folks. So who is she talking to? She's actually not talking to her actual audience who say, all right, Muslims are fine. She's talking to those people in Orange County she grew up with. And then Going Down to Texas is the really political song in which she basically, I'm going down to Texas, I'm touring, and Texas is a terrible place. And here are all the reasons Texas is a terrible place. That stuff, it has an effrontery about it.
I'm going down to sing in Texas where anybody can carry a gun. But we will all be so much safer there, the biggest lie under the sun. Go ahead and shoot me if it floats your little boat, but I'll live by my conscience even if that's all she wrote. I'm going down to sing in Texas where anybody can carry a gun.
So that song apparently was inspired by a show she played in Austin where there was a sign instructing people what their right to carry rights were. And so the song is about going to all these places. It's about being on tour in all these places, not just Texas.
Right.
She goes to Michigan where there are all these guns. She goes to place after place where there are nothing but guns, as there are in many places in America, a place where there are more guns than people. And the record, as you point out, does have a certain corniness to it. Every time I play it, Rob, I said this to you earlier, I think of that line in Allen Ginsberg's poem, America, I feel sentimental about the Wobblies, right? Because that's what this is. It's a sentimental record, but it's also a record laying claim to the Wobblies or the IWW, that way of thinking, that idealism and everything that's in that folk music tradition that produces songs like Joe Hill.
But the difference is that Allen Ginsberg is a Jewish guy, grew up in Passaic in a left-wing family, whereas for Iris DeMent, you would think that this is completely verboten, although it's my impression that she is still close to her biological family and that even if they don't agree with her, they respect her. And she has a song about the death of her father. That's one of the best songs she ever wrote. She loved her father, and I'm sure she had every reason to. But she's come a lot further than Allen Ginsberg came. No disrespect to Allen Ginsberg, please. Another reason I guess I care about her is that, as in my marriage, she apparently could not conceive a child with the folk singer. First, she married a fireman in Kansas, and that didn't work out. And then she married a folk singer named Greg Brown, but apparently they could not conceive a child. And they adopted a child from Russia, and she became very interested in Russian stuff. And we have an adopted child as well. And once again, she's so out front, so candid, without trying to shock anybody.
So I want to talk about Iris DeMent lives in Iowa, and I want to talk a little bit about another singer-songwriter who makes her home in Iowa, Pictoria Vark.
Pictoria Vark, who is a fantastic singer-songwriter from the indie rock singer-songwriter underground, which is thriving in Iowa City. It's thriving in Cedar Rapids, all over Iowa. Iris DeMent is part of this groundswell. I love Pictoria Vark. Her name is Victoria Park. She very shrewdly realized that was the least Googleable group name that she could perform under. She's Pictoria Vark. She is a bass player by...
As is Gina Birch.
Yes. Very interesting. The bass speaks to her. She can play guitar, but the bass is where her heart is. That's how she writes these songs. She's played bass in punk bands. This record is called The Parts That I Dread, and it's fantastic record about basically just about a young heart wandering. There's a lot of geographical wandering in it. I like how specific it is to places that she sings about, like Wyoming, which is about Wyoming, a place where she feels very much alone, and Friend Song, which is about Brooklyn, another place where she feels very much alone. Let's face it, she feels very much alone in a lot of these songs wherever she is. There's a lot of humor and emotional candor in these songs.
So she grew up in New Jersey, kind of an emo kid. And I know this, Rob, I only know about this record because you interviewed her and wrote about her in February in Rolling Stone. This record actually came out last year, and I only caught up with it recently. And in fact, a lot of the record, as you point out and you talked to her about, is about that traveling, kind of wandering feeling. But this music isn't emo-like, and it isn't particularly punk. What does it sound like?
I know what you mean by it's not punk, but it's definitely in that post-punk singer-songwriter style. But these are mostly very sad, quiet songs.
It's a little bit in the tradition of what used to be called a bedsit record if it was made in England. Now it's bedroom pop or bedroom recordings. You're talking about that post-punk lo-fi moment, maybe?
I guess I'm talking about singer-songwriters like Elliott Smith or Lois or the Softies with Rose Melberg. Very much in that sort of something that you would never call folk music, but it's got that stripped-down storytelling style that is key to the songs.
And a lot of these songs, it's funny, when I listen to them, they're relatively quiet, but there's a little guitar in the background, and through the whole song, it is like a drive. It's like a drive out in the West where you're on a long, flat road and you see the thunderstorm way off in the distance. You get to the end of the song, and there are these guitar freakouts that really change the song entirely, right?
Yes, it's a fascinating thing to see in young singer-songwriters, and I'm not sure I can thematically pin this down, but road trip albums are very much, I'm really trying not to say vehicle for expression, but the road trip album as a genre is having such a boom. So many of my favorite albums of recent years, Adult Mom's Driver comes to mind. There's a lot of really fascinating young songwriters who see being on the road. Boygenius very much, so many of these songs are road trip songs on the Boygenius record. There's something interesting about that, again, I can't really thematically pin it down, but this is very much a road trip kind of album.
Maybe it's generational. That is to say, these people are the age where it is still practical to drive all over the country or to take long trips to see your friends in other municipalities. These people are not homebodies. They are not in permanent relationships that put you in one place, as is, for instance, Iris DeMent, and I will mention Robert Forster, who I hope we get to soon. I can identify that insofar as I can remember being that kind of person myself, but it's generationally appropriate. And I think that there are many more people in their 20s than even in their 30s who live that life. Now, these professional musicians may well now be in their early 30s. I don't know how old they are, but they're professional musicians, which is another way you get to live that life.
Bob, you just brought up Robert Forster. Do you want to talk about Robert Forster, or do you want to talk about 10,000 gecs by 100 gecs?
I'd much rather talk about Robert Forster.
Well, look at that. That's not what you told me when we were emailing. But life goes on.
Could we squeeze in both?
We're very freewheeling. Maybe that was the original road trip record.
Robert Forster was half of the Go-Betweens. The other half was Grant McLennan. Grant McLennan was the guy with the tune sense. Robert Forster was not. That doesn't mean that Robert Forster didn't write a lot of songs, but they weren't as catchy as Grant McLennan. And then Grant McLennan died suddenly of a heart attack on I think it was his 48th birthday, and it's a great loss. The Go-Betweens are kind of a cultish group, but I'm definitely part of that cult and have been since the mid-'80s.
Yeah, Bob, you're pretty much the deputy leader of the cult. There might be another leader somewhere. Like, we don't know. There might be a Q of the go-betweens out there who hasn't revealed his identity, but otherwise you're the leader of the cult.
I think the cult's a little bigger than that, I would say.
Bob, you're a very persuasive leader. That's why the cult is bigger than that. Anyway, the Robert Forster record in question is called The Candle in the Flame.
I will say that I'm not so influential that I would have convinced the good government of Brisbane to call the bridge the Go-Between Bridge. That was the Brisbane's idea, not mine. Although it may well be true that in America, I'm certainly one of the more prominent fans, but they're an Australian band, and that's where they're really big. Were really big.
The Forster record in question is named The Candle in the Flame. And talk to us a little bit about where this record comes from.
Well, it's plainly inspired by the illness of his wife, woman he met after they broke up. He moved to Germany, met this woman, and then she came and lived with him in Brisbane. One of their sons was in a band called the Goon Sax. He's on this record, Louis Forster. But as I said, Forster's actually, since Grant died, his songwriting has somehow gotten better. I have no real understanding of why that is. Carol and I did a long Q&A with Forster for The Believer. I mean, we are big fans. Our friend Bernard McMahon reissued all their records in the UK, etc., etc. But the thing about this record in particular, the songs really have gotten better. He became a rock critic and won a literary award in Australia for his collection of criticism. His German-born wife has ovarian cancer, and ovarian cancer is a very, very aggressive and dangerous kind of cancer. And a lot of this album is inspired by his anxiety and caring for his wife with this
There's
great
a song called It's Only Poison.
It's written on the bottle on their shell. It's written deep in scripture that you can save yourself. It's only poison meant to drive you mad. It's only poison and it's all there.
It's a song about chemo. And she is a musician herself, and she's on this record insofar as she can be, which from what I understand is sometimes, because sometimes she was too sick to even be on the record. But this is in which her spirit is on the record the whole time. And as a very, very happily married person whose own wife had cancer, although nowhere near as dangerous as ovarian cancer, and came out of her treatment rather well. And it sounds as if his wife is going to survive, that poison is going to save her life. But who knows?
If you want to read the lyrics, that stanza that you mentioned.
You may feel drowsy, you may feel sleep, but the summer is over and you're on your feet. That's a good start. You need a doctor, you need a chef. You're far from over, and you can heal yourself. The body is a temple, the mind is a box. Your heart is like a river that no one can stop. It's written on the bottle on the shelf. It's written deep in scripture that you can save yourself. It's only poison meant to drive you mad. It's only poison, and that's all they have. I'm crying. That's a great fucking lyric. Just great. I think actually the songwriting in this record is the best of the post-Grant records, which he brings out not often, because if he writes 5 or 6 songs a year, he's obviously doing pretty good. And so they don't come out every year. But the quality, somehow, I think that is probably a sense in which he used to rely on Grant's facility, because he had facility and Forrester is simply, I don't want to say plods. I don't think that's fair, but he works on these songs. And throughout his post-Grant solo career, there is that sense of effort, high intelligence, not necessarily profundity or passion. This is certainly the best solo record. But he made one called The Evangelist, which was pretty good too.
Well, we're going to change the mood and change the drugs in question from chemo to something a little less poisonous and a little more likely to get us stoned while we talk about Little Yachty's Let's Start Here. Some of which, Rob, was recorded in your neighborhood in Greenpoint.
Absolutely. This is another very different sense, but another record that doesn't happen every day. There aren't a lot of things where big name rapper, one of the main guys in the hip hop game, just decides to make out of the blue a psychedelic rock record.
That's not really a psychedelic rock record. That is there, definitely, but it's still a hip hop record. No?
Well, I would have said psychedelic soul. I'm realizing that the psychedelia here is mostly in what he's taking and not the way it sounds, but there is some guitar noodling on this record. You like this record a lot, Rob.
I love this record.
Tell us why.
He goes into song mode extremely, with a great deal of humor and a great deal of skill. And apart from just the general fun audacity of this record, that this is something that nobody would have advised him to do. It's a sheer labor of love. He collaborates with artists I love. His song with Magdalena Bay is just absolutely fantastic. I love them. But he's very much trying different musical languages, making them his own.
Watch it, girl. Don't ever tell me lies. Watch, baby, you're not running out of time. What you may never know, it's more than you will see.
So he works with Patrick Wimberly of Chairlift. He works with one of the guys from Unknown Mortal Orchestra. One of the things he said in a Billboard cover story, he was like, well, people won't necessarily understand this record because they don't like the same things that I like. They don't like Bon Iver.
Gotcha.
Bob is raising his hand as one of the people who does not like Justin Vernon.
Or Tame Impala, another of his influences. Now, the odd thing is, when I found out what he thought was psychedelic, I said, oh, no wonder this record is not. I played this record before I knew Rob was on it because it got a very good review, I guess, in Pitchfork somewhere. I played it a bunch.
Got kind of a middling review.
Well,
in
wherever
Pitchfork.
Got a lot of good reviews.
I got the sense that it was something, so I do what I do. I pulled it out of Spotify, played it a few times, and then said, no, I don't like this record very much. Stayed there, and then Rob wanted me to play it. And I played it again one more time today, and I actually thought it sounded pretty good. I don't know what that means or whether it'll be permanent. The other thing I wanted to say is that anybody who puts the word yacht in his name is my enemy.
Okay, Bob. He's your enemy.
Joe Manchin, Jeff Bezos, need I say more?
Yacht is a very musical term. These days, when a yacht is discussed in a musical context, it's usually talking about yacht rock, which is a latter-day retronym for the smooth sound of some of Bob's favorite musicians of the 70s.
Oh, come on.
Can never remember how Bob made Christopher Cross. He made the Doobie Brothers. All these faves of yours. Pablo Cruz.
I hate these bands. Don't believe him.
I'm sorry. But I love how this does go for a yacht rock kind of sound, though. There's a sort of self-parodic lounginess to some of the
I
languor
certainly
on
prefer
this
it
record.
when a black rapper goes for a yacht rock sound than when a white rock band.
You know,
probably-
this is a funny, somewhat joyful record, right? It's goofy.
It is. It's goofy. Honestly, I loved this record so much when I heard it, and I didn't know how much of it was just the audacity and originality of it, and I didn't know if it would last. As it turns out, this is a record that I'm still listening to months later. To me, this is a record that has staying power just as a listening experience. When the initial novelty and weirdness wears off, these are still great songs.
I think like the Pictoria Vark record, it's a record of feeling over meaning. These aren't records that I go to for what they're about, and they feel very different ways. But they're albums that I would go to for the feelings involved. Like, these are vibes.
Vibes, absolutely.
Okay. Goofy in a different way, because, Rob, you wanted to see if we could squeeze this in. 100 gex, 10,000 gex. Is it only 10,000 or are they up to 100,000?
I can't remember. It is a little hard to keep track.
It's 10,000 gex. Bob, this is a record that got a full A from you. It's 10 songs in 26 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking about that full A.
Well, now you're backing off it?
Yes.
Is it going down to an A minus?
It's conceivable. I put it on today. No, but what I liked about it was it is one long gimmick. That's what I liked about it. It kind of doesn't mean anything, and it wears that on its sleeve. It is sheer throwaway, pseudo-hard rock. Not pseudo, what is the word?
Quasi?
Quasi, maybe hard rock, fun noises put into tunes. There are tunes there. I wouldn't go so far as to go the melodies, but tunes. I liked its throwaway quality, and I also liked the fact that it's a woman and a man rather than these latter-day folkies. This was definitely a woman who likes rock and roll, and you can hear that in the intonation and in the lyrics themselves.
If you think I'm stupid now, you should see me when I'm high. And I'm smarter than I look. I'm the dumbest girl alive. I took 10 pills today. I got bruises on my thighs. Plus I gave away my brain. I'm the dumbest girl alive. I got lightning in my veins. Walk around like Frankenstein. I did science on my face. I'm the dumbest girl alive. Never ask me what I think.
This record is obviously very slight, but I do believe that records that try to be fun very often aren't, and this one is. And that's the reason I gave it an A. And as I say, I'm going to have to think about it. See, it'll sort of depend on how much I want to play it over the course of the year. Do I get tired of it? I can see that happening. I don't know.
Band that they remind me
A
of.
minus for sure, but I'm not sure about the A.
Okay. The band that they remind me of more than a little bit is Big Stick. Do you remember Big Stick?
I remember the name Big Stick.
Crack Attack. You want your money back? Well, there's an album. There's a song. There's a band I wasn't expecting to have a conversation about today.
Or
That's
any
a fascinating
day. Or any
connection.
day
Or
ever
any day.
again.
Also,
I don't remember Big Stick.
Also,
Sounds like I'd
also
like
a man
'em.
and a woman. Also a band that put together fairly aggressive, fairly fun, sort of industrial rock sounding tracks. They were a funny band.
That's a fascinating comparison. That's absolutely true, though. There's something about a fun concept band. I listened to this record after you wrote about it, and something I liked was that it was bam, 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 and then it was there. I liked that they didn't try to stretch it out.
Oh, me too.
The brevity was definitely the soul of this wit.
There's something I would like about that. It has an audacity about it that I really admire, and that I think it's audacious without being mean-spirited in the slightest. They definitely is, we're having some fun here, and now we're going to do something else that's fun. This record is over.
So we're going to finish up with two very different guitar records, one from Balka Sound and the other from Soft Cult. And I want to start with Soft Cult's new EP, See You in the Dark. And Rob, this is a band that I persuaded you to come see at the Mercury Lounge.
Yeah, great band.
That show was a bit of a surprise to both of us.
Definitely, they were, as you said, very shoegazy band in terms of their sound, but they really have anthemic rock songs. Very emotional, very strong choruses.
Two twin sisters from Canada, although the comparisons to Tegan and Sarah are going to stop there. That's Mercedes and Phoenix. Mercedes on guitar, Phoenix on drums, and they have a background in an emo-ish band a pop-punk band, called Courage My Love.
Yeah, they've had a surprisingly long history because when we saw them live, I assumed
they were only 14.
Yeah, and they've been doing this a long time.
Right, they're in their late 20s, yeah.
Explains a lot of the smarts of the songwriting. They've been doing this a while.
Yeah, you kind of heard this as a 4AD sounding thing. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's I apologize in advance for using the word gauzy. And yet there's a gauzy.
The word gauzy, a very good word, Rob.
I love that word. There's a gauzy quality.
I can see why you're saying that too.
Yeah, but the songs are very punchy, and that combination of gauzy textures and the punchy songs.
Rob, Joe, the one thing that's confusing me about the discussion is that my understanding was you didn't think this was a very good record.
Well, I did think that they are a band that was much better live than on record. They've put out a number of EPs. I don't think they've fully realized what they're doing in the studio yet, but I do think the first two tracks on this record, Drain and Dress, are both very good. They are punchy, gauzy, very political songs. Drain is about the drain on the world's resources by older, rich, mostly white men. Bloated fucking dragons who would rather die hoarding more wealth than they could ever spend in a lifetime than part with a little to help save the world, according to an interview that Mercedes gave.
Did you actually hear that in the lyrics? Because my impression was that the lyrics are not all that discernible when you listen to this record.
I think that they are a very Riot Girl inspired band. They put out their own zine. They have a fantastic cover of Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle that is worth seeking out. They are inspired by that moment. They are not translating it explicitly in the recordings.
I expect to listen to it more. I expect to listen to Lil Yachty more, too. Both grew on me, but not into Mighty Oaks.
Early days. You got to give them time.
Bob, talk to us a little bit about Balka Sound.
Balka Sound is one of the dozens and dozens of African records that I like that almost nobody I know ever listens to. Although my readers, I have definitely over the years excited a little knot of African music fans in my readership. But the Congolese groove, the Senegalese groove, there's a South African groove. Each of these grooves is different. They're all Cuban-based, except for South African. And I myself am not a dancer, but that doesn't mean I don't like dance music. And it certainly doesn't mean my wife doesn't like dance music because she is a dancer. So we play a lot of African music, a lot more than you might imagine in our house, just because we really like the way it sounds. The thing about this record is that this record comes from not the Belgian Congo, Zaire. It comes from the French Congo. Now, I can't always tell the rhythmic stuff apart. It's hard, and I'm not a dancer. But in this case, this is from Brazzaville, French Congo, and it has much less of a Cuban sound, which is to say, yes, this is African dance music, as most African music is dance music, and it has a lot in common with music I adore, like Rochereau and Franco, who are really my favorite people in that world. However, if you feel like hearing some African music, but you wanted it to be a little different, this is that record. And I was very interested to learn that Joe liked it the moment he heard it, as did our friend Sasha Frere-Jones, a very rhythmically astute musician as well as critic. And by the way, this band was active from like 84 to 97 when somebody in the Zaire went in and killed somebody in their studio, and that was it for them. So it's not recent. On the other hand, it is that 97 date. That's coextensive with what was going on in soukous and rumba in Zaire. And it's not unrelated, but it's also different. There's an instrument called the naganfi, if that's how it's pronounced, Ngonfi. It's a rural instrument that the guy who led the band was good on, and that almost automatically changed that sound in a decisive, although not extreme, way. So it's nice to have somebody you'd never heard of before in a world that you care about a lot, who is distinctive and good, albeit not Franco or Rochereau. And that's what this record is. This is an A-, not an A. It will certainly be in the Dean's List at the end of the year because it has that utility that African music has in my household and has had for many years.
We've reached the end of the first quarterly Pazz and Jop report. I think we did okay.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you think so, Joe.
I learned a lot.
Without you.
And we'll see you back here in a couple of months. We'll have some links on our show notes to those reviews and pieces I mentioned of Rob Sheffield's, his review of the Boygenius record, his interviews with Gina, Birch, and Pictoria, Vark. And of course, we thank you for listening. And if you're a subscriber to Robert Christgau's And It Don't Stop, Bob, what would you like to say?
Read the Consumer Guide.
All right. I was thinking maybe a thank you, but whatever.
Oh, thank you.
Audiation.